Okay, I think this is a good sense of who is in the room. I'll do one more thing before I hand over the floor to Charles. Nancy, please, could you stop sharing screen? I want you to very, as quickly as possible, type into the chat box your name. Of course, I think we know your name, your organization, and your aspiration or your hope for today. What do you want to get out of this session? Or what questions do you have? Where are you calling in from? And one question or aspiration that you have for our time together. So if you could put that in the chat box, and we will just see what is there. And again, as you do that, you would see that we are recording this session. If you have any objection to that, please let me know. You can email or send a direct message to any of the hosts. I want to assume that it's okay to record. So please put into the chat box your organization and your hope or aspiration or question that you have as you join this session. Thanks, Grant. Okay, as you keep doing that, I will invite Charles to come in and tell us a little bit more about why we are here and paint the context for us.
Thanks so much, Akanimo, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening, depending on where you are. So why are we here today? Why are we having this open session? So it's about the board action part, but more importantly, it's about 2 years of work that we've done together. There are some who have been part of this process of exploring and looking at the sector, looking at the system, both the INGO system, but also looking at the broader development and humanitarian system through a systems change lens. We went through that process for 2 years. Through that process, we've developed innovations or prototypes. We've distilled lessons. But one of the most interesting things about that process was a specific key outcome, which was quite resounding from many of our community members. And Akanimo referenced our community, which is actually growing. And one of the things that they said, and it was often coming up throughout the process, was the fact that we needed to have a much more specific and targeted influencing agenda, and that there were two key decision makers that we needed to target. That is institutional funders. And here we're talking about the traditional funders that we all know of, the philanthropic foundations, the bilaterals, to some extent INGOs, and also INGO boards. And so when we started thinking about, okay, what's next for RINGO, we realized that it was important for us to focus on how we can engage with these two constituencies. So that's why we are here today. And that's why we've created or facilitated the board action pod. The other reason why we're doing this is that we realize that throughout all these discussions on transformation, on reforming policy and practice, usually these conversations are quite popular within the senior management levels, if they are actually happening, and within staff levels, possibly usually at the headquarters. But these are conversations that are hardly had, in the way that needs to be had at the board level. And it's for good reason, because most of the times at the board level, there's a huge focus on the growth of the organizations, on issues around compliance, on issues around risk, and really looking at how the organization can sustain the work that it does. And so there's very little space for conversations on how the organization can necessarily transform the sector, or how it can work differently with its partners in very innovative ways, and looking at the actual system. And so these discussions are normally overlooked. And we felt that it's important for us to target people who provide this kind of service at that level, at the executive level, people who are board members or trustees, and providing strategic direction to some of the most influential RNGOs that we have in this space. And so this is why we formed the Board Action Pod. We also realized it's an opportunity for us to bring all the learnings from all previous engagements, including what we had done during the RINGO, but also from internal processes. And many of your organizations, we recognize, have gone through several internal discussions. So to bring all this together so that we can have some sort of sharing and learning among board members and trustees of INGOs. So this platform really, it's about exploring, it's about experimenting, it's about us working together to come up with solutions that can help our organizations. And so the way we have tried to design this process is to make sure that it's not only useful for your role as a board member currently, but it's also relevant, and that enables you it gives you the tools and to champion certain changes that will strengthen the way your organization works, and the way your organization connects with its local and national partners all over the world. So this is why we are here today. And subsequently, you will hear more details about what the Board Action Pod will be, where we will focus, how it will be designed, and what we are seeking to achieve together. So we are excited. All of us are excited to host you, and you are once again warmly welcome. So I'd like to invite Deborah to come and just give us a perspective on what are the issues that we'll be seeking to interrogate throughout this process. Deborah.
Thanks, Charles. We should, I'm a little bit poorly, so I hope my voice, I'll try not to cough in the middle of this. Charles, you didn't introduce yourself, but did you want to do that really quickly, say who you are?
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. My name is Charles Kojo Van Dyke. I work for the West African Civil Society, and then I'm a core team member of RINGO.
Thanks. And I'm Deborah, partner at Rights CoLab, and also one of the co-conveners of RINGO. So there's a lot. I sit on a couple of NGO boards, and I support other leaders in the sector who are working with their own boards. And there's a lot on boards' plates right now. And I guess for those of you who tick that little box, you'll be familiar with some of these. One board that I engage with, they experienced a very serious challenge recently. A stakeholder accused the organization of being non-inclusive and that discriminated against engagement in their programs on the organization work based on race and class. And the board was perhaps naturally drawn into that discussion. It may have crossed an operational line, I don't know, but the board tried to mediate the situation and tried to find a resolution. I'm not going to go into the details of that because the situation is still ongoing, but it raised a whole host of bigger questions for the types of things that INGO boards kind of encapsulates have to deal with at the moment. There's lots of challenges, especially since Black Lives Matters, around race and class and power, decolonization, localization. These are really challenging concepts for boards. You're facing demands from staff, demands from stakeholders. How do you take this on? Do boards have the knowledge? Do they have the skills? Do they have the people to guide them through? Is DEI enough? On the localization agenda, which is probably top and center for many organizations around the world. There was a survey that I saw, or a report that I saw just a couple of days ago on INGOs being in perpetual crisis. And a number of INGO CEOs said, and board chairs said, localization has gone far enough. There's a pushback. So what is the balance? Funding is obviously kind of the main driver of a lot of these things. In the case of the board I'm speaking about, the risk to the reputation and potential drop in funding if not handled well. This certainly happened to organizations caught up in the sexual exploitation scandals in 2018. They saw their funding drop. But of course, funders are rapidly shifting both in the bilateral and philanthropic space to much more local funding, bypassing the INGO as intermediary. So there's that there's that challenge. 18 bilateral organizations signed up to support the USAID approach to shifting 25%, growing to 50% of funding going to local organizations, and 15 philanthropic organizations have signed up to that as well. There's also questions around business models, income generation. A couple of the boards that I work with, they're all, doing this hybrid of also, can they get paid for services? Can they do paid for services to help fund the NGO themselves? So new business models are coming into question. There's a whole, with all of these pressures, there's a whole changing role, purpose, and new ways of working. There's demands for more democracy in organizations, for more participation, for fewer top-down decision-making. And of course, with less hands-on delivery as the localization agenda changes, more and more INGOs are moving away or having to question their operational delivery models. How do you go about that? And how do you generate a return, and whether or not these new models can be decolonized? How should they be decolonized and address issues around power? Can with the changing role and purpose, can INGOs embrace size reduction? What is the pathway there? What does this closing or this narrowing mean in terms of the role and purpose of INGOs? Duty of care is top of the agenda, and I know on some of the boards I've discussed, yes, you have to bring about a lot of more work around duty of care, both to your staff and your partners, not just safeguarding, but in other areas, staff well-being. There are some INGOs that have been accused of toxic workplaces. What is the duty of care? And there's a cost associated with that. Let's be honest. What does that mean in practice? And then finally, the issue of staff turnover and questions of recruitment, right? It's both about, churn in your staff. How do you keep and retain good staff? How do you make sure you have staff who do reflect the diversity of the people you're working with? Where should they be situated? And then I know some boards are really thinking about questions about losing longstanding CEOs when they move into recruitment positions, which is a key role for INGO boards. How radical do you want your CEO to be? Or do you want a steady as she goes, safe pair of hands? Do you want a change agent? And what does that mean for the stability of your organization? So there's lots and lots, and this is just touching, the tip of the iceberg that boards are now having to discuss and take on. And these are new, I would say, certainly in the last 5 years. So next slide, Nancy. So these are just some of the issues that the Board Action Pod, we want to be able to create a safe space to address these. How do you address systems change and systemic inequalities in organizations and in the wider system? How do you balance your the localization agenda, the decolonization agenda with your impact? How can you prove and recognize and determine what your value add is in a much more equitable way and shape more participation in the workings of an INGO? And we hope that we can kind of redefine what global solidarity means when we're looking at this level of the international, the national, and local, and how we can work together much more effectively and share power and resources, and think about what the role of the board is in all of this. And that's kind of the genesis of some of this and what the issues we hope we'll be able to cover. I'm going to hand over to Akanimo, who's going to talk about how we're going to do this if you were to join the Board Action Pod. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. I will share a little about the Action Pod process. But before I do that, I just want to invite you and encourage you to put your insights or questions into the chat box. We might not be able to respond to all of it, but if something strikes you as we speak, please just put that down, and it might be beneficial to other people on this call. So the process, Rios has been the design partner of the RINGO process. And, currently we are thinking of this as sort of a three-pronged process or approach, with the intention to connect, to cultivate, and to contribute. So when it comes to connection, we want the Action Pod to facilitate or be a space for lively conversations with other board members. You will get to cross-pollinate and learn from each other, and perhaps share best practices. But again, we also want it to be a space of cultivation, where you'll be introduced to new frameworks, new tools, new case studies, and you have access to expert guardians, and there will be an opportunity, if you want, for some coaching. But again, we do not just want to offer everything. We also want it to be a space of co-creation and ownership. So we will, in this process, facilitate a space where, the board members or members of the Action Pod could develop new tools and new knowledge in order to influence the system. And we will begin, with an onboarding call. Charles will share the dates for those calls shortly. But the opportunity for the emphasis of these onboarding calls would be to create a space where you can contribute to the agenda, where you can surface the issues that matter to you. Deborah has very clearly, indicated some of those issues, but they are not exhaustive. Through those onboarding calls, you will say, we also want opportunity to talk about this and that. And the dates for those calls will be shared shortly. In phase one, the cohort will meet every 2 months for 6 months, and the intention is to start sometime this year, and again be and join it together as a cohort rather than in and out. So once we begin, I think it to be a close group of people joining together for the duration of this process. So what would be the format? Next slide, Nancy. Thank you. So as I said, it will be a space of co-creation, and we want to do this from the very beginning, starting from the inception call, where you get the opportunity to shape the agenda. It will be a space for open discussions and critical analysis, in a very collaborative environment. And we do not just want to talk about comfortable topics. We will get into very uncomfortable conversations, and it will be very structured, enabling active participation and active engagement. So it's still very open for you to shape and form, and we will share the important dates with you. Charles, please come in at this point.
Thank you so much, Akanimo. Thank you, Nancy. So yes, we are currently having the open house session today, right now, and we're going to have another session actually at 3 p.m. GMT. And so you could invite other colleagues you may think are still interested to participate, register. The onboarding calls will be in October 16th, the first onboarding call. We're looking at in the afternoon of October, but we are being very flexible about the times because we recognize that people are in different time zones. And so we'll be getting in touch, looking at everybody's time zones and then recommending the most appropriate times. But currently we are looking at 3 p.m. GMT for the first onboarding call. The second onboarding call will be on October 24th around the same time. And then we're going to have our inception meeting. So from the onboarding calls where we all participate in shaping how this journey should be, that will then influence how that inception meeting will be designed. And so that inception meeting will be on November 16th. And then we are looking at having another workshop in between that, giving us time to really reflect and apply some of these things that we've learned during the inception for the first workshop on February 20th, 2024. And then a second workshop on April 18th, 2024. And so that is the plan up to that point. Beyond that point, we're also looking at specific activities that will be announced that will connect this action pod to also the funders action pod, so that we can have an interaction, possibly an in-person kind of interaction. And so these are the dates, these are the proposed dates for the next couple of months. Akanimo.
Thank you, Charles. Before I let you go, can you say something a little about the retreats, the idea around the retreats?
Oh, excellent. So yes, so the idea is that we're going to have what we call a RINGO retreat, as I spoke about, where we're bringing together members. We have a funders action pod, members of this board action pod, local and national partners to come together, possibly an in-person retreat sometime in the middle of next year, for us to come and share our learning, but most importantly, to really get ideas from each other that can really push the needle, change policy, shape policy, and practice. And we are kind of, we realize that the in-person is always a little bit more impactful than the virtual. I think a lot of us have had a lot of virtual engagements, and I think we are just looking forward to seeing people in person. So we are also looking forward to having that retreat next year. So I think it's something that we should all look forward to, all of us who are members of the board action pod.
Thank you very much, Charles. We have about 10 minutes from now to sort of hear your voices. So if you want to make a comment or you have any questions, please do indicate and I'll invite you to speak. It's also, we also encourage you to put, your insights or questions into the chat box, and we will have space to engage. So if you want to make a comment or offer a suggestion or share an insight, please, this is the time. And the way we do it, you can use your virtual hand and I will invite you in just to create a bit of order. Kate, thank you. Please come in.
Thanks, Akanimo, and Charles and Deborah, and everyone. It's great to see you. I'm Kate, and I'm here in my role as trustee for Age International, but I have various other connections to different parts of systems change, including as a partner of WACSI. And so my question is really related to representation in the action pod. Is there an expectation that people are joining up as individual trustees, with the backing of the chair and the board and the governance that they're coming from. And I guess in a connected way, what is the expectation of how the work of the Action Pod is then taken back into boards, and ultimately the NGOs that they support? Can you talk a little bit about representation and governance around the Action Pod, please?
Thanks, Kate. Charles, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I'll take it, and I think Deborah can also help. So for this specific process, we wanted to make sure that there was institutional backing, like Kate, like you said. And so we went through the executive channels, talked to executive directors, who of course contacted the board chairs. And then I think there were internal discussions, and then there were proposals. So yes, you are here as an individual, but representing your organization. And the reason is we wanted to make sure that this process is relevant for your current role, wherever you find yourself, so that you then can take back some of the learning to strengthen the work that is already being done in your specific organization. And so when we went out there, we actually asked that every organization should propose at most 2 board members, and of course at least one board member to be part of this process, and a board member who is not just becoming a board member or also leaving, but somebody who's got a couple of years in there to play that board role. I hope that's helpful.
I think it's also, so Kate, as you know, with RINGO, people came with their individual hats on, but we do want to make sure that this phase that RINGO does have influence. And so we want to create a space to collectively ensure that things go back into organizations. But don't forget, RINGO is also about systems change. So I'm doing work across both action pods. So, what are some of the things that it's kind of building blocks. So, with the funder action pod, there are some systems things that an organization can't do on their own. And we know the same would be at the INGO level. So if we've got a bigger community, getting your collective minds together to think, okay, what can you as boards do collectively? Some have signed up to the pledge, but again, there will still be systemic barriers, and which is why the building blocks bring us to the retreat, which brings funders and boards together. Because we both have, in our funder action pod, we have philanthropy and bilateral funders. So there are policy issues or perceived policy issues. Some of them are more perception than actual laws. So we want to make sure that these things meet in the middle as we explore organizational change and then think about collectively what we can do together. It feels like in this space, there's so much going on around decolonization and localization. But, a lot of what we hear is still a lot of talk and not as much moving into action. And there's still a lot of barriers. So we hope that we're providing a kind of space to urge on the real practice of changing actual work that happens. So I hope that helps a little bit on the kind of what we hope that space can do and the expectations, both organizationally and systemically.
Thank you, Deborah. I think the internet of Akanimo dropped, so I'll hold on as he rejoins. So there are a few questions in the chat that I want to bring it up so that Charles and Deborah can take it. So from Lucy, she's asking, do you have a target for the number of INGO board members you would like to participate in the board action pod in order for it to be most productive? Charles, will you help us with that?
Yeah, great question, Lucy. Thank you. So our target is between 25 and 30. And we want it to be what we call a reasonably manageable number so that we have everyone's voice being heard, active participation, and people feel a value of being part of the process, and especially because of the role of board members, we understand the commitments, and so that is the number we are looking at.
Thank you very much, Charles. Is there any question? Please, you can raise your virtual hand. Some of the questions have already been responded in the chat, so I wouldn't really repeat it. But then there was a question from Emmanuel, which maybe to be good for Charles to address that. So Emmanuel was asking how long would the onboarding course? So maybe you can also look at how long would the inception meeting take?
Absolutely. So the onboarding calls will be 1.5 hours, 90 minutes. Our meetings will definitely not be more than 2 hours. And that's one of the things that we've had internal conversations about, making sure that we really make use of the time, recognizing that people have a lot of work to do. And so some of the workshops may possibly be 1.5, others at most 2 hours.
Okay. Thank you, Charles. So there's one last question here. I will take it and then you can hand it over to Akanimo, who is now back. So there's a question from Soren, who wants to ask, will it be relevant for representative of both larger and smaller INGOs? So Charles, can you help?
Excellent. Thank you, Soren. Really good question. So when we reached out to the INGO community, first of all, we made some considerations. We looked, of course, at size, and geography, and diversity in terms of issues and themes. So currently, for those who have registered to be part of this process, there is some significant diversity as regards the size, both large and small, but also the geography, whether based in Europe, in the US, Australia, etc., even in the global South. And then, of course, the work that they do in terms of thematic, some are social justice, some are humanitarian, some are environmental. So we really tried very hard to attract the diversity that represents the system. And this is something that we are very deliberate about.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Charles.
Nancy.
Akanimo, I'll hand it over to you now. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks, Charles. Sorry, my connection dropped for a bit there. We still have about 2 minutes for any other question before we move to the next agenda item. Okay, Esther, thank you.
Thank you. Just to ask whether this is a one-off or whether you'll be running it again, as there's an organization I'd like to draw into this, but they're not ready. Thank you.
That's a great question. Deborah, please.
Esther, show me the money. We'll do it again.
Ron, Deborah.
Great answer to a great question. Okay, so Nancy, please, now that we know about the action pod, how do we register? What is the next step? Please tell us about that.
Thank you very much. So I'll be sharing a link in the chat for you to let us know how you want to really engage. But if you want to register, if you want to be part of the INGO board action pod, please reach out to Waxy, reach out to Charles Van Dyke. Please, Charles, kindly share your email in the chat. Kindly just contact Charles with your information, and then we will get back to you and engage you for our upcoming onboarding course. But for us to help to get all information together on one page, I will be sharing a Doodle survey briefly in the chat. Kindly let us know how you would like to engage so that we can also follow up with you and facilitate the engagement process. Thank you very much.